The wrought iron gates of Whispering Pines Ranch swung inward with a whisper of well-oiled machinery, revealing a vista that stole the breath. Beyond the imposing filigree, a gravel drive, meticulously raked, unspooled like a silver ribbon through acres of manicured lawn. Ancient pines, their needles a deep emerald, stood sentinel, their boughs catching the late afternoon sun in a dappled dance of light and shadow. The air, crisp and carrying the faint scent of pine resin and expensive perfume, vibrated with a low hum of anticipation. Today was the annual Veterans Benefit, and Whispering Pines was, as always, a symphony of understated luxury. The main lodge, a grand structure of stone and dark timber, sat nestled against a gentle rise, its wide verandas already bustling with early arrivals. From its lofty perch, one could survey a shimmering expanse of lake, where a pair of swans glided with serene indifference, and further afield, the picturesque stables, their red roofs a vibrant contrast against the verdant landscape. Floral arrangements, bursting with ivory roses and deep crimson peonies, adorned every available surface, their delicate perfume mingling with the richer aromas wafting from the outdoor catering tents. Slow-roasted prime rib, delicate truffle arancini, and a medley of artisanal cheeses. A sleek black Mercedes S-Class, its chrome gleaming, purred past the gatehouse. Inside, Mrs. Albright adjusted the silk scarf draped elegantly around her neck. Her gaze swept across the impeccably maintained grounds, a small, approving nod gracing her lips. She appreciated discretion and true quality, qualities Whispering Pines exuded effortlessly. Her driver, a quiet man named Thomas, eased the car to a stop behind a line of equally opulent vehicles. A sapphire blue Rolls-Royce Phantom, a gleaming silver Bentley Continental, and a cherry red Ferrari California T, its engine a low growl of barely contained power. Guests spilled from their luxurious cocoons, a kaleidoscope of designer gowns and bespoke suits. Jewels glittered, reflecting the golden hour light, and laughter, light and melodious, drifted on the gentle breeze. A truly magnificent affair, as always, Mrs. Albright murmured, stepping onto the gravel. She smoothed the skirt of her deep amethyst dress, her posture impeccable. Such an important cause, too. These brave men and women, they deserve every ounce of our support. She offered a warm, genuine smile to a passing couple, their faces alight with the festive spirit. The fundraiser was the brainchild of the ranch's enigmatic owner, a man known more for his quiet philanthropy than for ostentatious displays of wealth. Every year, without fail, Whispering Pines opened its gates for this singular event, channeling every penny raised into programs supporting wounded veterans, providing housing, rehabilitation, and educational opportunities. It was a cause close to Mrs. Albright's heart, a sentiment echoed by many of the distinguished attendees. As she made her way towards the lodge, a flicker of movement caught her eye near the stables. A man, elderly and clad in what looked like a faded service jacket and worn work boots, was meticulously tending to a patch of rose bushes. His movements were slow, deliberate, his hands calloused. He seemed utterly oblivious to the fashionable throng converging on the main event, his focus entirely on the delicate petals. Mrs. Albright felt a pang of warmth. So often, at these grand events, the quiet backbone of the operation went unseen, unthanked. She considered walking over to offer a word of appreciation, but a sudden surge of arriving guests swept her forward. Just then, a sleek emerald green Aston Martin Vantage pulled up, its arrival announced by a rather ostentatious revving of its engine. From the driver's seat emerged a young man, barely out of his 20s, his hair impeccably styled, his suit a shade too tight across the shoulders. He had an air of casual entitlement, his eyes scanning the crowd with an almost predatory glint. Behind him, a woman, equally young and clad in a dress that glittered with sequins, teetered on impossibly high heels. "Ugh, finally," the young man, whose name was Julian Vance, announced loudly, oblivious to the small circle of polite smiles that immediately faltered around him. "Took us forever to get through that ridiculous gate traffic. And honestly, who organizes these things? It's a complete zoo." He gestured dismissively towards the line of luxury cars still inching their way up the drive. His companion giggled, a high-pitched, almost artificial sound. Mrs. Albright's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Such rudeness, so openly displayed, always grated on her. She believed true wealth, true grace, lay in humility, not in bombast. As Julian and his companion began to stroll towards the lodge, their voices carrying snippets of self-important chatter, Julian's gaze, equally dismissive, fell upon the elderly man still tending the roses. He paused, a smirk playing on his lips. "Look at that, Bethany," he drawled, nudging his companion. "Even the stable hands are getting dressed up. Though I suppose dressed up for them means a slightly cleaner pair of boots. Honestly, you'd think they'd at least try to blend in." Bethany tittered again, her eyes flitting over the old man with a mixture of amusement and disdain. The old man, still focused on his roses, seemed not to hear them, or perhaps simply chose to ignore them. He continued his quiet work, his movements unhurried, his presence a stark, unassuming contrast to the dazzling spectacle unfolding around him. Mrs. Albright watched, a knot forming in her stomach. The young man's words, though not directed at her, felt like a small, sharp jab. It was a reminder that even in the most elegant of settings, true character, or lack thereof, would always find a way to reveal itself. The evening, though grand, had just taken a subtly unsettling turn. Leo's unimpressed arrival. Leo Harrison slumped against the polished oak railing, a sigh escaping his lips that was far too theatrical for the elegant surroundings. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume, freshly cut roses, and a hint of something earthy from the nearby stables, did little to pique his interest. He'd barely registered the purpose of the fundraiser, something about veterans. All he knew was that his father, Mr. Harrison, had dragged him here promising a crucial networking opportunity that translated, in Leo's mind, to hours of forced smiles and insipid small talk. "Leo, mind your posture," Mr. Harrison murmured, his voice a low, urgent hum as he navigated the crowded veranda. His eyes, though, were fixed on a retreating figure in a charcoal suit, a man Leo vaguely recognized as a major investor in their latest tech venture. Mr. Harrison's forehead was already creased with a familiar worry line, a telltale sign of a deal hanging precariously in the balance. "It's just so beige," Leo muttered under his breath, gesturing vaguely at the tasteful decor. He was bored. Terribly, utterly bored. The clinking of crystal glasses, the muted chatter of well-heeled guests, the soft strains of a string quartet, it all blended into an unbearable drone. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, expensive model, and began scrolling through social media, feigning intense interest in a new post from a friend at a much more exciting club. Mr. Harrison, meanwhile, was a man possessed. His handshake with a passing senator was firm, his smile practiced and sincere. "Senator, excellent to see you. Remarkable turnout, isn't it? Whispering Pines truly outdoes itself." He nodded vigorously, his gaze constantly sweeping the room, searching for the next influential face, the next potential connection. The weight of securing the funding for their new AI-driven logistics platform pressed down on him, a constant, low thrum beneath his tailored suit. This deal, he knew, was make or break. Failure wasn't an option. His family's reputation, his entire financial future, rested on this evening. "And this is my son, Leo," Mr. Harrison announced, pulling Leo away from his digital escape as a portly gentleman with an impressive mustache approached. Leo offered a quick, forced smile, his eyes barely meeting the man's. "Charmed," Leo mumbled, already plotting his escape. He hated these introductions, the inevitable questions about his studies, his plans, as if anyone genuinely cared. They only cared about his father's status, about what the Harrison name represented. His father, however, was already deep in conversation with the portly gentleman, discussing market trends and projected quarterly growth. Leo's mind drifted. He imagined being anywhere else. The roar of a racetrack, the pulse of a nightclub, even the sterile quiet of his own gaming room. Here, amidst the quiet hum of philanthropy, he felt utterly out of place, a peacock among pigeons. He glanced around, searching for a distraction, a flash of rebellion, anything to alleviate the suffocating politeness. His gaze fell on a lone figure near the stable entrance, an elderly man in a worn jacket, meticulously tending to a rose bush. There was a quiet dignity in the man's posture, a complete absorption in his task that somehow irritated Leo. He always found such unassuming diligence vaguely offensive, a stark contrast to the performative displays of wealth around him. Look at him, Leo thought, a sneer forming on his lips. Probably just happy to be here, polishing someone else's property. The sight of the man's scuffed boots, so out of place amidst the gleaming shoes and designer heels, solidified Leo's disdain. This whole event, these people, they were just props in his father's grand play, and he, Leo, was a reluctant, bored actor. "Excuse me, son, I need to catch Mr. Henderson," Mr. Harrison said suddenly, his voice tight with urgency, pulling Leo back from his internal monologue. He patted Leo's shoulder, a gesture that was more about reorienting himself than genuine affection, and then strode purposefully into the crowd, his eyes scanning, his ambition a palpable force. Leo watched him go, then returned his attention to the rose tender. A smirk played on his lips. This, at least, was a more interesting diversion than the endless parade of business talk. Wandering towards the stables, Leo's lip tightened as he watched the old man fuss over a single stubborn rose. Its deep crimson petals seemed to mock the man's gnarled hands, an utterly pointless perfection Leo loathed. He glanced back at the throngs of guests, a shimmering expanse of silk and costly cologne. His father, a diminutive figure amidst industrial titans, remained engrossed in conversation with a woman whose diamonds threatened to eclipse the chandeliers. The air hung heavy with forced pleasantries and the delicate clink of champagne flutes, a suffocating politeness that made Leo's skin crawl. Enough. Without a word, Leo detached himself from the rose garden's periphery. No one noticed. They never did. Not until he engineered something overtly disruptive, And even then, their attention was fleeting, quickly diverted to the next potential deal. He moved with practiced ease, a phantom in the gilded cage. His expensive loafers made barely a whisper on the meticulously raked gravel path that wove past immaculate lawns. The scent of fresh-cut grass, usually a pleasant aroma, here felt engineered, another costly amenity. He passed a clutch of women, their laughter like brittle glass, their chatter a blur of stock options and summer retreats. Their vibrant dresses resembled exotic birds perched on wrought iron benches. Further on, a small string quartet played a classical piece, its intricate melody threading through the twilight. Leo paused, not out of appreciation, but a vague curiosity at the musicians' unwavering concentration, their fingers dancing with a dedication he couldn't fathom. The music evoked nothing in him, merely a detached observation of their meticulous effort. The path meandered past a koi pond, its surface a mirror reflecting the last vestiges of sunset. Fat, orange, and white fish glided beneath lily pads, their mouths opening and closing in silent, repetitive motions. It was all so constructed, every bush perfectly sculpted, every stone precisely positioned. It felt less like a ranch and more like a stage set, designed to impress and exploit. His eyes scanned the horizon, seeking an escape from this relentless artifice. In the distance, beyond a grove of ancient oaks, he saw them. A cluster of low-slung buildings, their weathered wood a stark contrast to the gleaming white of the main house. The stables. He'd seen them on the ranch's glossy brochure, tucked away like a rustic afterthought. They promised something different, something less adult. A faint, earthy scent, a blend of hay and something distinctly animal, drifted on the gentle breeze, a welcome change from the cloying sweetness of floral arrangements and the sharp tang of expensive liquor. Leo quickened his pace, a nascent curiosity stirring within him. He pictured horses, powerful and untamed, a stark contrast to the domesticated human spectacle he'd just left behind. Perhaps a young stable hand might offer some gossip, some illicit amusement. Or maybe he could find a way to provoke a thoroughbred, just to inject some genuine chaos into the evening. The path narrowed, becoming less formal, less lit. The chatter and music from the fundraiser began to fade, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. He was leaving the polished veneer of the event behind, stepping into something a little rougher, a little more authentic. The stables, when they finally came into full view, were larger than he'd anticipated. A long, low structure with a series of open stalls. A lone light spilled from an open doorway, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. This was more like it. This held the promise of something beyond the polite, something unscripted. It held the promise of a distraction, and perhaps a thrill. The old man by the fence. The syrupy sweetness of lilies and champagne dissolved with each step Leo took, leaving the imposing main house behind. Manicured lawns gave way to a less formal, though impeccably kept, gravel path winding towards the stables. Here, the air offered a different kind of solace, a rustic blend of hay, horses, and rich earth, unburdened by perfume. He rounded a bend in a venerable stone wall, seeking the solitude he craved, a sanctuary from the forced smiles and transactional pleasantries of his father's domain. Instead, he found an old man seated on a low, three-legged stool, his back to Leo. The man was meticulously repairing a section of wooden fence bordering a small, surprisingly riotous rose garden. Crimson and delicate pink blooms erupted in vibrant contrast to this rustic, almost forgotten corner of the estate. The man's movements were deliberate, each tap of his hammer against a fresh nail precise and unhurried. He wore a faded olive-green jacket, its fabric softened by countless seasons, and trousers patched with darker swatches, testament to their longevity. His scuffed, worn boots bore the silent narrative of 1,000 miles. A low, tuneless hum emanated from him, a gentle, private melody, neither joyful nor sorrowful, simply a quiet accompaniment to the industry of his hands. Leo watched, hidden in the stable's deep eaves. There was an almost meditative quality to the old man's focus, a complete immersion in the simple act of repair. He wasn't rushing, wasn't seeking approval or recognition. He was simply doing. Leo, so accustomed to a world of constant performance and expectation, found himself unexpectedly mesmerized. This was a powerful counterpoint to the performative politeness he'd just fled. The old man's gnarled, weathered hands worked with an economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime of labor. He carefully extracted a splintered plank, his movements unhurried, almost reverent, as if the fence itself possessed intrinsic worth. Then he aligned a new, unpainted plank with practiced ease, securing it with a series of soft, rhythmic taps. Each tap resonated in the quiet afternoon, a small, honest sound. A stray beam of late afternoon sun illuminated the side of the old man's face as he leaned in to inspect his work. His skin was tanned and deeply lined, etched with the stories of countless sunrises and sunsets. A few wisps of white hair escaped from beneath a worn canvas cap, glinting like spun silver. His eyes, when they briefly flickered towards the roses, held a gentle, almost wistful expression, utterly devoid of the calculating glint Leo was so accustomed to seeing in his father's associates. There was no ambition in that gaze, no restless striving, only a deep, abiding contentment. Leo unconsciously shifted his weight, a pebble crunching under his shoe. The old man didn't startle, didn't even turn. He merely paused his humming, his head cocked slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, without looking up, he resumed his quiet song, his hammer rising and falling with the same unhurried rhythm. It was as if Leo's presence was merely another small detail in the peaceful expanse of the old man's world, a world where fences were mended, roses bloomed, and quiet hums filled the air. There was no challenge in his demeanor, no hint of servility or resentment, just an old man engaged in his work, existing in a way Leo had rarely witnessed, completely, utterly, without artifice. He was simply part of the ranch, as fundamental and unassuming as the very earth beneath his worn boots. A joke for the guests. Leo's gaze drifted from the old man's weathered hands, moving with an almost meditative rhythm, to the small cluster of guests emerging from behind a thick hedge of honeysuckle. They were a trio of women, their laughter light and tinkling like the crystal flutes served earlier, their silk dresses a blur of pastel against the verdant backdrop. Boredom, a persistent hum beneath his skin, suddenly sharpened into a mischievous spark. This was it. A chance to inject some much-needed amusement into an otherwise stifling afternoon. He smoothed the lapels of his own impeccably tailored jacket, the fine wool feeling restrictive now, a uniform of expectations. He considered his audience. Mrs. Albright, a formidable woman, known for her discerning eye and even sharper wit, was among them. Winning her approval, even with a fleeting jest, would be a minor victory against the suffocating weight of his father's relentless pursuit of connections. He'd seen his father charm, manipulate, and cajole, all with a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. Leo, however, preferred a more direct, if less diplomatic, approach. A plan began to form, a quick, clever jab that would surely elicit a ripple of polite amusement. The old man, still immersed in his task, was the perfect, unwitting foil. He was, after all, just a ranch hand, an anonymous figure paid to maintain the picturesque facade of the estate. His presence was so unassuming, so utterly devoid of the social posturing that defined everyone else here, that he practically begged to be the butt of a good-natured joke. A harmless bit of fun, Leo reasoned, something to break the oppressive formality. He sauntered towards the group, a confident, almost theatrical swagger in his stride. The women paused their conversation, their smiles faltering slightly as he approached. He offered them a charming, if practiced, grin. "Ladies," he began, his voice smooth, carrying just the right hint of playful condescension. "Enjoying the rustic charm of the surroundings?" He gestured vaguely towards the stable area, then, with a subtle shift, fixed his gaze on the old man. Mrs. Albright raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent challenge in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison," she replied, her tone cool. "We were just remarking on the exquisite roses, a truly remarkable variety." Her gaze, however, flickered towards the old man as well, a brief, unreadable assessment. Leo ignored her veiled rebuke. He was already building his comedic premise. "Yes, the roses are quite robust," he conceded, his voice laced with an exaggerated solemnity. He glanced back at the old man, who, oblivious to the gathering audience, continued to prune a thorny branch with meticulous care. The man's worn leather gloves, cracked and stained, were a testament to years of toil. His faded denim shirt, patched at the elbow, spoke of practicality, not fashion. Leo felt a surge of confident amusement. This was going to be easy. He cleared his throat, drawing the women's full attention. "You know," he said, pitching his voice to carry just enough to be overheard by the old man, but not so loudly as to be overtly rude. "My father always says that the best way to appreciate the simple things in life is to pay someone else to do them." A small, nervous titter broke out among the younger women. Mrs. Albright, however, remained impassive, her expression unyielding. Leo pressed on, emboldened by the small success. "I mean, look at our friend here," he continued, gesturing with an open hand towards the old man, who still hadn't looked up. "He's certainly committed to the craft. One might even say obsessed. Though I must admit, I find the whole dirt under the fingernails aesthetic a bit much for a Sunday afternoon tea." He chuckled, a light, dismissive sound that bounced off the manicured hedges. He watched the old man's back, waiting for a subtle flinch, a sign that his words had found their mark. He imagined the old man bristling, perhaps even grumbling under his breath, providing the perfect punchline to Leo's carefully constructed joke. This was going to be a classic, a little jolt of entertainment for everyone, and a subtle reminder of his own superior position. Leo's gaze drifted from the meticulously arranged canapes to the old man, who was now carefully pruning a thorny rose bush near the edge of the sprawling lawn. The man's back was to the gathering, his movements slow and deliberate. a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the fundraiser. A mocking smile tugged at Leo's lips, a fresh opportunity for amusement presenting itself. He glanced at Mrs. Albright, who was observing him with a curious, almost expectant expression. "Look at that, Mrs. Albright," Leo began, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard by a few well-heeled guests nearby. He gestured casually with his champagne flute towards the old man. "Such rustic attire for such a grand occasion." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air, then took a dramatic sip of his drink. "One would think he's preparing for a mud wrestling competition, not a high society soiree." A ripple of quiet discomfort passed through the small cluster of guests. A woman in a shimmering emerald gown gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. A gentleman beside her shifted his weight, his eyes darting between Leo and the unsuspecting gardener. Mrs. Albright, however, remained impassive, a faint, almost imperceptible arch in her eyebrow, the only indication of her reaction. Emboldened by the subtle stir, Leo pressed on, his voice gaining a theatrical edge. "And those boots!" he exclaimed, his laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. "I mean, truly, one can practically trace their entire life story in the scuffs and cracks, a testament to what exactly? A profound aversion to shoe polish, perhaps?" He paused again, waiting for a shared chuckle that never came. The silence that followed felt heavy, punctuated only by the distant murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. He stepped a little closer, his eyes fixed on the man's worn work boots, caked with bits of dry soil and faded from countless hours under the sun. "They look like they've seen more battles than a Roman centurion," Leo mused, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Perhaps he's just returned from taming a particularly unruly patch of dandelions. A perilous mission, no doubt, requiring such rugged footwear." He imagined the man's indignation if he heard him, a flicker of perverse satisfaction igniting within him. Then his attention shifted to the man's jacket. It was a simple, olive green canvas, its fabric thinned in places, the elbows almost translucent. It hung loosely on his frame, hinting at years of wear and countless washes. "And the jacket," Leo continued, his voice now a stage whisper, though still perfectly audible to those around him. "A veritable heirloom, wouldn't you say? Passed down through generations of gardeners, I presume?" He gestured with an exaggerated flourish. "I doubt even the finest vintage boutique would carry anything so authentically distressed." A few more guests nearby exchanged uneasy glances. One woman cleared her throat, her gaze pointedly avoiding Leo's. Another gentleman took a sudden, intense interest in a nearby topiary. The air around Leo seemed to thicken with unspoken disapproval, a palpable tension replacing the earlier polite hum of conversation. Yet the old man continued his work, oblivious to the performance unfolding behind him, his focus unwavering on the delicate petals of the rose. Mrs. Albright's eyes, however, were fixed on Leo. Her expression was unreadable, a cool, appraising look that pricked at Leo's carefully constructed bravado. He tried to meet her gaze with an air of nonchalant superiority, but a faint tremor of unease started to snake through him. He'd expected amusement, perhaps a shared laugh at the old man's expense. Instead, he was met with a wall of quiet discomfort, a collective disapproval that made his carefully crafted mockery feel suddenly hollow and tasteless. The old man, still tending his roses, remained an island of quiet dignity amidst the awkward silence Leo had created.
The silent veteran.
Leo's carefully constructed amusement fractured, his grin wilting under the oppressive silence. He'd anticipated a cascade of boisterous laughter, the customary shared derision that typically punctuated his pronouncements. Instead, a peculiar quiet had descended upon the terrace, more suffocating than the humid night air. Mrs. Albright, her expression a cipher, had merely shifted her gaze to the rose garden, as if an impending tea rose bloom held more fascination than Leo's performance. The other guests, a tableau of expensive silk and practiced smiles, suddenly found their champagne flutes engrossing or the distant city lights unexpectedly captivating. He sought out the old man, expecting a flicker of confusion, perhaps even a nascent indignation. But there was nothing. The gardener had paused, secateurs hanging loosely in his gloved hand. His gaze didn't hold anger, nor fear, nor the bewildered incomprehension Leo usually encountered from those beyond his gilded sphere. Instead, eyes the color of worn denim met his. Ancient, crinkled from years of sun, yet remarkably clear and steady. In their depths, Leo saw no judgment, but a quiet weariness, an understanding so profound it felt like an accusation. A small, almost imperceptible nod followed. Not subservience, nor agreement, simply acknowledgement. A recognition of Leo's presence, his words, and the chasm between them. This quiet gesture held no malice, no hint of offense taken, merely an acceptance of the moment, a grasp of something Leo couldn't quite fathom. It was as if the old man had weighed Leo's taunts, found them utterly without substance, then, with cosmic patience, simply moved on. The silence stretched, now amplified by the old man's unwavering stare. A peculiar heat bloomed on Leo's cheeks, not exactly embarrassment, but a strange, unsettling vulnerability. He was accustomed to orchestrating reactions, to steering conversations, to being the focal point, even if for all the wrong reasons. Yet this man, this nameless gardener in a threadbare jacket and mud-caked boots, had somehow inverted the dynamic without uttering a single word. The old man held Leo's gaze a beat longer, then slowly, deliberately, his attention drifted. His calm, unhurried eyes moved from Leo's face, past the bewildered guests, and settled back on the broken section of white picket fence he'd been mending. No theatrical sigh, no huff of exasperation, no dramatic turn of the back. It was a seamless transition, as though Leo's entire monologue had been no more than a fleeting breeze, barely rustling the rosebush's leaves. He bent slightly, his movements unhurried, almost ritualistic. The secateurs clicked once, a crisp snip, snip, as he pruned a rogue branch interfering with a loose picket. Large, calloused fingers, surprisingly nimble, retrieved a small coil of thin wire from a hip pouch. With painstaking precision, he began to thread it through the damaged section, brow furrowed in concentration. The subtle scrape of metal against wood, the soft sigh of wire pulled taut, became the terrace's sole sounds, punctuated only by the distant city's thrum and the night wind's whisper through the leaves. Leo watched, mesmerized by the quiet dignity of the man's labor. A profound stillness enveloped him, an unshakable focus that made Leo's frantic, performative world suddenly seem flimsy and inconsequential. The old man wasn't just repairing a fence. He was restoring order, patiently coaxing brokenness back into wholeness. And in that simple act, performed under the mocking gaze of a privileged fool, he radiated a quiet strength that made Leo's carefully honed barbs feel like childish pebbles thrown against a mountain. The garden, moments ago a mere backdrop for Leo's amusement, now seemed to pulse with a hidden vitality, a testament to the old man's quiet dedication. The dew-heavy roses seemed to lean towards him, offering silent gratitude. Leo, for the first time in memory, felt a prickle of something unfamiliar, not anger, not boredom, but a profound, almost uncomfortable sense of his own insignificance. The old man hadn't fought back, hadn't argued, hadn't even deigned to acknowledge Leo's existence beyond that single, weary nod. He had simply continued to be, and in his quiet, unwavering being, he had diminished Leo more profoundly than any shouted retort ever could. Mr. Harrison's desperation. Leo lingered by the fence, held captive by an uncharacteristic stillness. The gardener, either unaware or unconcerned, continued his rhythmic carpentry, the steady thwack of hammer on wood, a subtle counterpoint to the distant chatter. The air, previously thick with Leo's self-satisfaction, now felt thin, almost fragile. A prickle of unease, like an unseen but keenly felt gaze, crawled up his spine. The sudden clamor of a voice shattered the quiet. "Leo, there you are, for heaven's sake!" Mr. Harrison rounded the stable corner, his face a grim mask of urgency. His tie hung slightly askew, and a fine sheen of perspiration gleamed on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He strode towards Leo, oblivious to the quiet dignity of the mending gardener. "I've been searching everywhere for you, son. Do you grasp the importance of tonight?" Mr. Harrison's voice was a low, urgent hiss, a stark contrast to the easygoing banter he usually adopted at such functions. "This isn't merely a garden party, Leo. This is critical." Leo simply arched an eyebrow, a practiced gesture of cool disinterest. "Is it? Looks like a garden party to me. People in ludicrous hats, sipping champagne, discussing whatever trivialities they discuss." "Don't be glib." His father's hand chopped the air, a nervous tick. "This is the Henderson deal, Leo. The one I've toiled on for months. It's the linchpin for the company's future. We secure this contract, we're stable for 5 years. We lose it." He trailed off, the unspoken repercussions looming like a storm cloud. "Mr. Sterling is paramount. He's the one who can sway Henderson, who can seal this for us." Leo shrugged. "Then find him. He's probably propping up the bar, spinning old war tales." Mr. Harrison raked a hand through his already rumpled hair. "I've scoured the bar. I've scoured everywhere. He's not with the main contingent. He's notoriously elusive at these gatherings, always vanishing, chatting with staff, who knows where." His gaze flickered over the quiet gardener, dismissing him instantly as just another employee. "I need your help to locate him, Leo. Now. Every moment is precious." Leo exhaled a theatrical sigh. "Fine, but if he's insufferable, the blame rests solely with you. He owns this entire ranch, Leo. He's anything but insufferable. He's a legend. Just endeavor to be charming. Avoid your peculiar theories. Simply nod, smile, and allow me to conduct the conversation." Mr. Harrison's eyes pleaded, a rare glimpse of vulnerability in the usually unshakable man. Reluctantly, Leo followed his father back towards the main gathering, leaving the steadfast gardener and his rhythmic hammering behind. The shift from the hushed periphery to the party's din was jarring. Laughter mingled with the clinking of crystal, the murmur of 100 conversations forming a constant, undulating sonic wave. They navigated the throng, Mr. Harrison's eyes sweeping every face with a focused intensity that rendered him oblivious to offered champagne flutes or polite greetings from acquaintances. Leo, meanwhile, lagged behind, his gaze drifting over opulent dresses, impeccably tailored suits, and polished smiles that seemed to conceal everything and nothing. "No, not him," Mr. Harrison muttered, dismissing a man with a booming laugh. "Too boisterous. Sterling is quieter, more discerning." They circled the main marquee, then ventured towards the smaller, more intimate seating areas scattered across the illuminated grounds. Mr. Harrison paused to exchange a few strained pleasantries with a potential client, his eyes still darting over the man's shoulder, searching. Leo stood by, arms crossed, making no effort to engage, radiating an aura of mild disdain. "This is futile, Dad," Leo finally grumbled. "He's probably departed. Or he's sequestered in the stables, buffing his riding boots." The words were infused with his usual brand of sardonic wit, but Mr. Harrison was too preoccupied to notice. "He wouldn't leave. Not tonight. Not with Henderson present." Mr. Harrison pressed on, his determined stride eating up the manicured pathways. "He must be here somewhere. He's the very soul of this operation. He cares deeply about these veterans, about this place." Their search continued, a relentless, increasingly desperate hunt through the glittering facade of the fundraiser, Mr. Harrison's hope slowly eroding with each empty corner and unfamiliar face. The tension in his shoulders mounted, his brow furrowing deeper with every passing minute. Leo, for his part, remained a tableau of bored detachment, oblivious to the mounting pressure that threatened to consume his father. The evening, which had once felt like an endless expanse of tedious obligation, was now tightening around Mr. Harrison like a vice. The unexpected summons. The clinking of crystal and the murmur of polite conversation were a discordant symphony to Mr. Harrison's mounting anxiety. He'd already done a sweeping reconnaissance of the main terrace, his gaze dissecting every cluster of guests, every impeccably dressed figure. No Mr. Sterling. The man was a ghost, a legend whispered about in hushed tones amongst the financial elite, and now, a phantom at his own fundraiser. Leo, of course, had offered a half-hearted, sarcastic suggestion about checking the koi pond for submerged business contacts before retreating to a safe distance, ostensibly to observe the local fauna, which Mr. Harrison knew translated to avoid interaction at all costs. A hand, surprisingly firm and warm, landed gently on Mr. Harrison's shoulder. He flinched, turning to find a man whose presence exuded an effortless authority. His silver hair was meticulously coiffed, a perfectly tailored tweed jacket draped over a frame that spoke of quiet strength, not brute force. A scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco clung to him, a comforting aroma amidst the cloying sweetness of the floral arrangements. The man's eyes, a startling shade of intelligent gray, crinkled at the corners as he offered a small, knowing smile. "Mr. Harrison, I presume." The voice was a smooth baritone, cultured and calm, cutting through the background chatter with a surprising clarity. Mr. Harrison straightened, instinctively adjusting his tie. "Indeed. And you are?" "A friend of Sterling's," the man replied, his smile widening slightly. "I noticed your focused attention. Searching for our elusive host, I gather." A wave of relief, quickly followed by a fresh surge of desperation, washed over Mr. Harrison. Yes, precisely. I had hoped to catch him before the main address. There's a rather time-sensitive matter I need to discuss. He felt a familiar flush rise to his cheeks, the uncomfortable sensation of needing something from someone else. The distinguished man's gaze softened with understanding. Ah, yes, the deal. Sterling mentioned you might be rather eager. He paused, his eyes twinkling. He has a rather unique approach to these gatherings, you see. Prefers to be hands-on, as it were. Hands-on? Mr. Harrison repeated, utterly bewildered. He pictured Sterling, a titan of industry, meticulously arranging canapes or polishing silverware. The image was absurd. The man chuckled, a low, rich sound. He finds the pretense of these affairs rather tiresome. Too much air, not enough earth, if you catch my drift. He gestured vaguely towards the bustling terrace. He often seeks solace and, indeed, inspiration in less conventional corners of the estate. Mr. Harrison's patience was wearing thin, his internal clock ticking louder with each passing second. With all due respect, sir, I'm afraid I don't quite follow. I was under the impression he would be mingling, or perhaps preparing for his speech. The elegant man's eyes held a glint of amusement. Oh, he'll mingle, eventually. But first he tends to his roots. He values authenticity, you see, finds it in unexpected places. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice conspiratorially. If you're truly keen to find him, Mr. Harrison, I suggest you try the stables. Mr. Harrison blinked. The stables? The very thought struck him as preposterous. Why would one of the wealthiest men in the country, the host of this opulent event, be found among horses and hay? It defied every expectation, every social convention he had meticulously built his life around. Yet, the man's conviction was undeniable, his tone devoid of any jest. The stables? Mr. Harrison asked again, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. He glanced around, as if the stables themselves might suddenly materialize amidst the manicured lawns. Indeed, the man affirmed, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. He finds clarity there, away from the plumage, as he calls it. He appreciates a good horse, a good story, and a good, honest day's work. You'll find him among the practical, the real. He's often assisting the stable hands, or simply observing. Don't be surprised if he looks rather unhost-like. A knot of apprehension tightened in Mr. Harrison's stomach. This was precisely the kind of unpredictable, eccentric behavior that made doing business with Mr. Sterling so challenging, yet so potentially lucrative. He imagined navigating the equestrian areas, his expensive leather shoes sinking into straw, his bespoke suit gathering dust. It was anathema to his carefully constructed world. "Thank you," Mr. Harrison managed, the words feeling inadequate. He offered a stiff nod, his mind already racing, calculating the quickest, least conspicuous route to the stable block. The elegant man offered a final, enigmatic smile and melted back into the crowd, leaving Mr. Harrison feeling more disoriented than ever. He cast a quick, frustrated glance at Leo, who was now engaged in a silent, intense debate with a particularly vibrant Petunia, oblivious to his father's latest predicament. The stables. He had to be joking. Or perhaps he wasn't. And that was the most unsettling thought of all. The shocking revelation "The stables, Leo, hurry!" Mr. Harrison's voice was a tight whisper, laced with an urgency that cut through the humid night air. He strode purposefully, his gaze fixed on the distant glow of lantern light that marked the stable complex. Leo, still smarting from the elderly gentleman's vague dismissal, trailed behind, his expensive loafers kicking up puffs of dust from the gravel path. The ornate arches and manicured lawns of the main house quickly receded, replaced by the earthy scent of hay and horseflesh. The drone of polite chatter from the fundraiser faded, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps. Mr. Harrison, usually so composed, was a man possessed. His bespoke suit, typically uncreased, now seemed slightly rumpled from his hurried pace. He mumbled to himself, something about authenticity and this eccentric old man. Leo, meanwhile, found his attention drawn to the details of the path, the way the moonlight silvered the leaves of the towering oak trees, the faint whinny of a horse from beyond a high fence. He still couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, even here, in a place his father clearly thought was beneath them. As they rounded a bend, the stable yard opened before them. The air grew cooler, carrying the rich, distinct aroma of leather and well-tended animals. Several stalls were lit, casting long, dancing shadows. In the center of the yard, illuminated by a single, powerful lantern, stood the very man who had advised Mr. Harrison. He was engaged in quiet conversation with someone else. Leo's breath hitched. The someone else was the elderly rose tender, the man Leo had so casually dismissed and mocked earlier that evening. He stood there, his worn tweed jacket catching the lantern light, his hands, still stained with earth, clasped loosely in front of him. He was listening intently, a slight smile playing on his lips as the distinguished gentleman spoke. Mr. Harrison, too, stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. The sight of Thomas, the influential man whose name Leo now vaguely remembered hearing in hushed tones, speaking with the humble stable hand, was an unexpected tableau. It was Thomas who broke off the conversation first, noticing their arrival. He turned, his gaze sweeping over Mr. Harrison, and then, momentarily, landing on Leo with an almost imperceptible glint in his eye. "Ah, Mr. Harrison," Thomas said, his voice as smooth and deep as before. He then turned back to the rose tender, a gesture of profound respect in his bearing. He bowed, not a perfunctory nod, but a genuine, deferential bow that spoke volumes. "Mr. Sterling," he intoned, his voice resonating with an almost reverent respect. "Your hospitality, as always, is unparalleled." The words hung in the air, heavy and significant. Leo felt a cold wave wash over him. Mr. Sterling. The name echoed in his mind, colliding with the image of the unassuming old man in the dusty tweed. His jaw, which had been slack with mild surprise, now dropped entirely. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving a prickling chill in its wake. He glanced at his father, whose own eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were now wide, staring in abject disbelief. The frantic energy that had propelled Mr. Harrison to the stables seemed to evaporate, replaced by a profound, almost comical stillness. The rose tender, Mr. Sterling, merely nodded, his smile widening slightly. He looked from Thomas to the two Harrisons, his gaze lingering on Leo for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement that contained a universe of unspoken meaning. There was no malice in his eyes, no overt triumph, only a quiet, knowing serenity. Mr. Harrison, usually so adept at navigating complex social situations, found himself utterly speechless. The urgent deal, the grand fundraiser, the carefully constructed facade of his world, all of it seemed to crumble in the face of this shocking, undeniable truth. The man he had been so desperately searching for, the elusive and enigmatic Mr. Sterling, had been right there, tending his roses, embodying the very authenticity that Thomas had spoken of. And Leo, his entitled, mocking son, had publicly scorned him. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant, almost mocking strains of classical music from the main house. Leo could feel a hot flush creeping up his neck, a furious blush that had nothing to do with the night's cool air. His carefully constructed disdain, his easy superiority, had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. He stood there, diminished, insignificant, under the gentle, knowing gaze of the man he had so cruelly underestimated. A familiar chat. Elijah Sterling turned from Thomas, his eyes deep and knowing, settling first on Mr. Harrison, then drifting to Leo. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on the old man's lips, a gesture of quiet amusement that sent a shiver down Mr. Harrison's spine. The frantic energy that had propelled him through the stables, the desperate urgency to find Sterling, evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard stillness. He felt as though he'd been caught in a harsh spotlight, every past transgression illuminated. Mr. Harrison. Sterling's voice was a low murmur, surprisingly rich for a man of his apparent age. A pleasure to finally meet you. There was no warmth in the greeting, only a profound sense of irony that pierced through Mr. Harrison's carefully constructed composure. The words, so polite on the surface, carried the weight of an unspoken accusation. Mr. Harrison's mouth opened, then closed. His face, usually a study in controlled affluence, began to flush a deep crimson, the color creeping up his neck. He wanted to speak, to offer some explanation, some apology, but the words were caught in his throat, strangled by disbelief and burgeoning mortification. Then Sterling's gaze shifted to Leo. The faint smile on his lips widened fractionally, a glint of steel entering his eyes. "And young Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "We've already had the distinct pleasure of a rather spirited chat, haven't we?" The air crackled with unspoken tension. Leo felt a sudden, sickening lurch in his stomach. The casual arrogance he'd worn like a second skin moments before shattered, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. His face burned, not just with the heat of the sun, but with a profound, searing shame. He could feel the weight of his father's horrified gaze on him, a silent accusation more potent than any shouted reprimand. The memories of his earlier derisive comments, his sneering dismissal of the old man's attire, his patronizing tone, flooded his mind, each word a hammer blow to his ego. He remembered the old man's quiet dignity, his unblinking stare, and now, in this stark light, it all made a terrible, awful sense. Mr. Harrison finally managed to stammer, Mr. Sterling, I can't tell you how profoundly sorry I am for any misunderstanding. My son, he didn't realize. We had no idea." His words trailed off, incoherent and desperate. He looked from Sterling to Leo, his eyes wide with a mixture of anger and abject humiliation. His son, his own flesh and blood, had just insulted the man whose goodwill they so desperately needed. The sheer magnitude of Leo's blunder and his own failure to recognize Sterling settled on him like a suffocating blanket. Sterling merely nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on Leo, a silent challenge in its depths. "Indeed," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It seems there was a great deal that was unrealized, especially regarding the humble nature of certain individuals." The subtle emphasis on humble was a direct, cutting reference to Leo's earlier disdain. Leo felt his cheeks flush a deeper shade. He wished the ground would open up and swallow him whole. He couldn't meet Sterling's eyes, nor could he meet his father's. The weight of their combined disappointment pressed down on him, suffocating him. He was no longer the detached, bored observer. He was the focal point of a humiliation he had orchestrated entirely himself. The grand, impressive fundraiser, the glittering guests, the pristine ranch, it all faded into a blurry backdrop. Only the quiet, unyielding presence of Elijah Sterling and the crushing weight of his own foolishness remained. Mr. Harrison, seeing the hard set of Sterling's jaw, the knowing glint in his eye, knew that apologies, no matter how fervent, might not be enough. The damage had been done, and the architect of that damage stood beside him, a monument to misguided arrogance. The crucial business deal, the very lifeline for his company, now seemed to hang by the thinnest of threads, held hostage by his son's casual cruelty. He desperately searched for a way to salvage the situation, but the silence that followed Sterling's words was too heavy, too pregnant with judgment to easily break. The air in the stable, once filled with the mundane scents of hay and horseflesh, now carried the pungent odor of his own profound regret. The oppressive silence in Elijah Sterling's office was broken only by the gentle hum of an unseen air conditioning unit. Mr. Harrison, his face a road map of regret, shifted uncomfortably, the expensive leather of the armchair squeaking beneath him. Leo, still reeling from the earlier confrontation, found himself staring at a framed photograph on Sterling's desk. A group of young men in military fatigues, their smiles wide and genuine. Sterling, noticing his gaze, picked up the frame. His eyes, though knowing, held no malice now, only a profound weariness. "Whispering Pines," he began, his voice soft, yet resonating with an authority that belied its volume, "is more than just a ranch. It's a sanctuary." He set the photo down gently. "These young men and countless others like them come here to heal." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a sound almost imperceptible. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you have a commendable charity here. We are, of course, deeply apologetic for Leo's misguided remarks." Sterling raised a hand, stopping him. "The remarks are secondary, Mr. Harrison. What matters is understanding the purpose. Whispering Pines is a long-term rehabilitation facility for veterans suffering from both physical and psychological wounds. Our focus isn't just on mending bones or minds, but on rebuilding lives. We offer vocational training, art therapy, equine therapy, even organic farming. The roses Leo found so amusing, for instance, are part of our horticulture program, a therapeutic outlet for those grappling with PTSD. Leo, despite himself, felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Not shame, not yet. but a burgeoning discomfort. The image of the old man, his hands caked with soil, tending the vibrant blooms, now took on a different hue. "We believe in a holistic approach," Sterling continued, his gaze unwavering as he addressed both men. "Many of these soldiers return home feeling alienated, disconnected. They've witnessed horrors, endured unimaginable losses. Whispering Pines provides a safe space where they can reconnect with themselves, with nature, and with a community that understands their struggles. We don't just treat symptoms, we cultivate resilience." Mr. Harrison's eyes were fixed on Sterling, a dawning comprehension slowly replacing his earlier mortification. "And the funding, Mr. Sterling?" he managed, his voice hoarse. "My own," Sterling stated simply, as if discussing the weather. "Every penny, from the land to the staff to the specialized medical equipment, it's all privately funded." He gestured vaguely around the room. "I sold my company, a significant portion of my assets, to establish this place. It's a commitment, not just a donation." Leo finally spoke, his voice surprisingly quiet. "But why the work? Why were you out there in the garden yourself?" The question hung in the air, revealing his continued inability to grasp the concept of genuine service. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Sterling's lips. "Because it's my home, young man. And because these veterans need to see that leadership isn't just about barking orders from an office. It's about being present, about getting your hands dirty alongside them. The worn boots, the service jacket, they're not a disguise. They're a uniform of dedication. It's a reminder to myself and to them that we're all in this together. It helps to break down barriers, to foster trust. When they see me working the soil, mending fences, or even just sitting with them, they understand that I'm not just an abstract benefactor. I'm one of them, in spirit, if not in scars." The weight of Sterling's words settled over the room, pressing down on Mr. Harrison and Leo. The opulent surroundings of the ranch, which Leo had so carelessly dismissed, now seemed imbued with a profound purpose. The quiet dignity of the man before them, the very man Leo had so blithely ridiculed, was a stark contrast to their own superficiality. The business deal, the crucial multi-million-dollar transaction that had brought them here, now felt impossibly distant, dwarfed by the immense human endeavor unfolding around them. Mr. Harrison could feel the deal slipping through his fingers, not because of any financial misstep, but because of a catastrophic misjudgment of character. A new chapter. The crisp air, once a mere backdrop to Leo's disdain, now carried the faint scent of pine and something else, something akin to purpose. The silence that followed Elijah Sterling's revelation was not empty. It hummed with the weight of shattered preconceptions and burgeoning understanding. Leo felt it in his chest, a dull ache that was slowly morphing into something resembling regret. He looked at Mr. Sterling, truly looked at him, and saw not a hired hand, but a man sculpted by a life of meaning, a man whose worn boots and faded jacket were not signs of diminished status, but badges of honor. His father, Mr. Harrison, still seemed rooted to the spot, the color drained from his face. But Leo felt a shift, a profound internal tremor. The words he'd so blithely uttered, the cutting remarks about tattered cloth and calloused hands, echoed back to him, each one a fresh sting. He had been so utterly, irrevocably wrong. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth, but beneath it, a nascent feeling of respect began to bloom. He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze fixed on Mr. Sterling. The older man's eyes, once so patiently observant, now held a quiet understanding, devoid of judgment, yet full of an unwavering knowing. "Mr. Sterling," Leo began, his voice rough, unused to the unfamiliar sensation of genuine humility. He cleared his throat, pushing past the burning embarrassment. I owe you an apology, a profound one." He saw Mr. Sterling nod, a gentle encouragement that somehow made it easier to continue. "My words, they were unkind, ignorant. I saw your boots, your jacket, and I made assumptions. Terrible assumptions." He gestured vaguely towards his own polished loafers, suddenly feeling their unearned luxury a burden. "I saw work, and I scoffed at it. I scoffed at you." The admission hung in the air, raw and exposed. He took another breath, forcing himself to meet Mr. Sterling's gaze without flinching. "But those boots," Leo continued, a new reverence entering his tone. "They've walked through more than just rose gardens, haven't they? They've walked through life, through purpose. And that jacket, it's not just old fabric, it's a testament to service, to dedication, to a kind of strength I'm only just beginning to comprehend." He felt a warmth spread through him, a release from the suffocating grip of his own arrogance. "I respect you, Mr. Sterling, more than I can say. And I respect what you do here, what this place truly is." Elijah Sterling's expression softened, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a warm, genuine smile. It was a smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the last vestiges of Leo's discomfort and replacing them with a cautious hope. "Leo," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "It takes courage to admit fault, true courage, and to see beyond the superficial. That is a rare and valuable gift." He took a step closer, placing a hand gently on Leo's shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding, not condescending. "The boots, the jacket," Mr. Sterling continued, a twinkle in his eye. "They tell a story, don't they? A story of living, of building, of contributing. And sometimes those stories are best understood not through judgment, but through observation, and then, perhaps, participation." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant rose bushes, then back to Leo. "This ranch, Whispering Pines, it's about healing. Not just for our veterans, but for anyone who walks through its gates with an open mind and a willingness to learn." His smile widened. "I've seen a shift in you today, Leo, a significant one. And if you're truly interested in understanding the stories told by these worn boots, by the hands that tend these roses, and by the hearts of the men and women who find solace here, I invite you to stay. To observe, yes, but also to engage, to lend a hand, to listen, to learn. There's always work to be done, always a lesson to be found." Leo's heart swelled with an emotion he couldn't quite name, a blend of relief, gratitude, and a burgeoning excitement. The idea of staying, of genuinely engaging, felt like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating expectations. He looked around, the ranch no longer just a backdrop for his father's business dealings, but a living, breathing entity, full of purpose and potential. He saw the veterans now, not as distant figures, but as individuals with stories, with lives that deserved respect and understanding. I I would like that very much, Mr. Sterling, Leo said, his voice steadier now, infused with a newfound resolve. I want to learn. I want to understand. I want to contribute. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, a sense that he was finally stepping onto a path of his own choosing, a path that promised more than just superficial luxury. This wasn't just an apology, it was a commitment to a new chapter, one written not in the sterile ink of his father's ledgers, but in the rich, earthy tones of purpose and genuine human connection. The scent of roses, once dismissed, now carried a subtle promise of renewal.